My name is Michelle Nelson. Those of you who do not know me, I am the social worker over at St. Michael's Hospital on the mental health unit. I am also the chair of the Suicide Prevention and Mental Health Awareness Committee here in Portage County. So tonight's speakers are Linea and Cinda Johnson. They are co-authors of Perfect Chaos, A Daughter's Journey to Survive Bipolar and a Mother's Struggle to Save Her. It's a wonderful opportunity that we have both of them here tonight so they can tell their story of not only Linea and her struggle with bipolar disorder, but also her mother can talk about her own struggle in helping her daughter through it. So Linea Johnson is a recent graduate from Seattle University with a major in English and creative writing. Prior to transferring to SU, she completed 3 years at Columbia University, Chicago in a musical performance program. Linea is currently working as a research assistant at Harborview Medical Center in Seattle, Washington, the very same center where she was treated for bipolar disorder. Previously, she worked as an intern at the World Health Organization in the mental health department. She is a national speaker and writer advocating for understanding and support for people with mental illness and the elimination of stigma. She also has met Chicago Bears player, who took a stand for mental health and wore the bright green shoes for Breast Cancer Awareness Month. If all of you had heard about that, she had the honor of meeting him as well. But we won't hold that against her, even though we're all Packer fans, but we won't hold that against her. Cinda Johnson, PhD, is professor and director of the Special Education Graduate Program at Seattle University. She is also the principal investigator and director of the Center for Change and Transition Services. She is a national leader in the area of transition from high school to post-high school settings for young people with disabilities. She has written articles and book chapters in the area of secondary special education and transition services with an emphasis on young youth with emotional and behavioral disorders and mental illness. She has worked and presented with national leaders at Bring Change to Mind, NAMI, and One Mind for Research. I did have the opportunity to hear them speak earlier today, and you guys are in for a wonderful presentation. They're both extremely articulate and have a wonderful message in which to give you all. So it is my pleasure to welcome Cinda and Linea Johnson.
Just start off with saying, go Packers.
Actually, my dad's from Wisconsin, so go Packers. I won't talk about Brandon Marshall, I promise. So thanks for having us. This is really great to be here. You guys are doing amazing things around mental health awareness in your county and your communities, and we've been really impressed with the last 3 days that we've been here speaking to different technical colleges and clinicians. Can you hear me better now? Okay, great. So we are really, really happy to be here. So in the end of June, not this last June, but the June before, I had the opportunity to be the keynote speaker for the National NAMI Convention in Seattle, which is where we're from, which is really nice to not have to travel. We do a lot of traveling all over. I just got back from Boston on Thursday, and she just got back from Hawaii. Unfortunately, she had to come back from Hawaii on Monday. So
that's working.
She has to work there. It's horrible. So I had this wonderful opportunity to speak at the NAMI convention in front of 7,000 people, and this is how I prepare my speeches a lot of times. This is a little tiny printed speech wrapped in plastic that I stick in my shower and memorize whenever I'm going to give a big keynote. And so I'll come back to this later, but this is my shower speech from NAMI, and so I wanted to share some of that with you today. I know we have some of your local NAMI here, which is really great, so be sure to talk to them afterwards as well. So whenever we speak, and whenever we speak all over the country at national and international conferences, and I always hear from people, you don't look like someone who. And I think, you don't look like someone who what? You don't look like someone who at 16 sat in your backyard thinking where to cut yourself so your parents wouldn't see. You know, do I cut myself under my arms? No, if I play basketball, they'll see. Do I cut myself on my feet? You know, You don't look like someone who was hospitalized in the psychiatric ward twice, 3 times. You don't look like someone who overdosed because you were manic and overdosed on your anti-anxiety pills. You don't look like someone with bipolar or someone who's crazy. And I just think, what does that look like? And actually, it's 20% of the population have some kind of mental health condition, so it looks like any one of us. It looks like all of us in this room. It really can look like anyone. So it's just interesting that 1 in 5 adults live with a mental health condition, and yet the stigma is so great that we think that it only looks like the homeless on the street that are really unstable, or the really unfortunate, horrible stories you see in the news of the gun violence that's happening all over the place. So, you know, my path to acceptance and to getting to where I am today, I first really started experiencing I first started experiencing depressions when I was 15. I first started experiencing suicidal ideation when I was 19. And I began to really first find acceptance, which I've talked about today as a very slow process that I go back and forth with all the time. But I first started finding acceptance when I was 19, when I realized that it was an actual brain disorder. That it wasn't something that was a personality flaw, that was something that I was doing wrong, that I wasn't working hard enough or smart enough, or that I was acting out, that it was actually in my brain. That was the first step towards acceptance for me, of moving forward, knowing that it's a chemical imbalance that can be corrected by medication or by, you know, exercise, sleep, taking care of yourself, and a whole broad range of different treatments that can help you. So that was the first step for me when I was 19, was realizing the science behind it. But of course, I was 19 and in college, and what do you do when you're in college? You party and then you crash. And I would, you know, just be a normal college freshman and drink every weekend and not understand why I wasn't like my peers, why I would then spend the next week crying and I couldn't figure out what was wrong with me. I really didn't realize what was going on. So when I first was dealing with all of this, there was so much stigma, and there's so much stigma that I didn't even know I could talk about it with anyone. I thought that it was just me, that no one else was experiencing these depressions, no one else dealt with anxiety. I thought I was the weird one. So I started journaling. And for me, that was really a way of getting to know what my symptoms were, getting to know who I was and what
blowing out when she's anxious instead of taking it inward. So there's those differences, but those are still both symptoms. They're not behaviors of someone being bad or not being compliant or doing the wrong thing. So that's one. And then here, what can you do? Can I give you my top 10 of what you can do? Okay, yes, okay. We've been talking this is 8 hours in 2 days, and so you have to give me feedback. All right, what can you do? Number 1 is be familiar with the symptoms. You know, parents, you are familiar with symptoms of fever. You're familiar with symptoms of sprained ankles. You're familiar with symptoms of chickenpox, although I guess I wasn't.
I was really tired coming here, and I tried to tell her I couldn't come because I had the chickenpox. And she's like, "What are your symptoms?"
She's like, I picked something I would know.
And then I was like, well, maybe I have malaria. Well, what are your symptoms?
She was tired, but she was trying to get me. She said, I picked something I knew you would know I didn't have, but right away my mom goes, like, what are the symptoms? So knowing the symptoms of depression and anxiety and an eating disorder, and you don't have to necessarily know the symptoms of schizophrenia and bipolar disorder to the DSM level, but to know those symptoms enough to know when to seek help. And when, like a parent, and I'm talking to parents now, and then we'll get to youth and young adults and your own self, but know when you watch this because, you know, they've had a temperature, they're a 3-year-old, they've had a temperature that spiked for 5 hours, you don't necessarily rush off to the doctor. But if in 10 hours their temperature is 103 and they're lethargic, you usually call your doctor. with depression, when do you call the doctor? You know those symptoms about when to do that. And then why can't we have this in the K-12 system, the school system? Our kids know about drug and alcohol, our kids know about safe sex, our kids know about going to parties with a partner to help them out, our kids know about not to bully, our kids know about what harassment is, but do they know the symptoms of depression and anxiety, which is the two that hit the most in high school? High school, middle school, college students. How many of you had a full curriculum around mental health symptoms when you were in the K-12 high school system? Raise your hand. Did you? Good. There's a few. There's a few. And then knowing them yourself so that you know when you should talk to somebody and when you should get checked out and when you should go to a doctor. So the next one is being familiar with your symptoms and being honest. Honesty has saved us more than anything. Honest if you're someone who has a mental illness, about your symptoms as much as you can possibly be. Honest if you're a family member, honest if you're a friend, honest if you're connected with providers and with each other. Honest about those symptoms. And that's been something that we've had to work on. I've had to learn how to honestly say to Linea, I am scared to death that you didn't get your meds refilled. And that 2 days will go by and you won't take them. Because when she first was diagnosed at 19 and 20, I was in charge of the meds. And then she became in charge of the meds. And then I started to have to let go, but I was still worried. So for me to tell her that and for her to turn around and say to me, Mom, you gotta trust me. You take such good care of me. You give me the message I can't ever take care of myself. And I use that brilliant sentence with my students. It's like, we can't do such a good job that they can't take care of themselves, but we have to be honest as family members and friends and to say, you are an adult and I can't make you do anything, but I am really, really worried about what I see. You seem so unhappy. You seem so alone. I worry that you're drinking too much. I worry that you're in your room too much. I'm worried. And just to be honest, knowing that you can't maybe do anything about it, but honesty I think is huge. And even to have a conversation about honesty. We sometimes start our honest conversations about, can we be honest? So that is a big one. If you have someone that you love or that you care about that has a mental illness, offer to be an advocate. Linea says, just go with them to a doctor appointment and sit there if they need it. Drive them there. I found one that's really been helpful for a lot of people is to make that initial phone call. So many people are afraid to make that first phone call. And then you do make the phone call and you get put on hold and you get, we're taking copious notes, writing like mad. And when class was over, a number of students came up to talk to Linea. And the one student came up to me, she's like, Dr. Johnson, do you have a moment after class we can talk? I said, sure. So she came up and she said, I am so humiliated and so embarrassed that we said that last week. And she said, I just can't even believe we said that. And I said, you probably have learned more from tonight than if I would have said something to you, because she felt horrible hearing Linea. And I said, in the medical field, you have the elevator rule, and that is that, if you're working in a hospital, you do not go in the elevator and talk about a patient, ever. You don't talk about a patient in the cafeteria, you don't talk about a patient in the grocery store. And I said, you are going to be a professional in the field with young people with mental health conditions, and you better follow the elevator rule everywhere because you do not know. So speaking up, talking about it, it's really tough, but she shouldn't have said that. And we all, I could see all your faces going, oh my gosh, cringing, but she did. And she got called on it. And I think it changed her, and I think that she will now be an advocate for that herself. So a couple things I want to talk about. First of all, discrepancy. The first thing that I really noticed when we stepped into the mental health world as consumers, and we were just with a doctor in Atlanta a couple of weeks ago that said he hates the word consumer. He said, why do we call them consumers? We don't call people who have cancer consumers. You know, why do we call people who have a mental illness consumers? So that was interesting. He's, you know, talking about that. But there's this huge discrepancy between people who live with mental illness and have resources and people who do not. And it's gigantic. And we're not, I mean, I wrote in the book, we are middle-class people in the city we live in. Bill Gates lives in our city. We are middle-class people, but in the bigger world, we do pretty well. You know, we are able to have mental health insurance, we're able to contact doctors, we're able to have vehicles and speak English and all those kinds of things. And so what struck me the most is, and I'm gonna push it out there, those of us with privileges have responsibility. Because until everybody has got a voice in this, we're not gonna make much progress. Because those of us who have resources and do well can just quietly do our thing, and those that aren't doing very well can show the rest of the world how crazy you look with a mental illness. And so yeah, it looks like us all. So that was the first thing that struck me was not only, and I did not put this book out, she did. She said we have to do something, and I was right behind her. So that's the first thought. The second one is that we talk about stigma. Stigma is discrimination. If you really think about it, stigma is discrimination. Stigma against hiring someone who has a mental illness. Stigma against allowing your daughter to go out with a kid who just got out of a psychiatric hospital. Stigma against getting resources and support for someone with a mental illness. That is discrimination. And when I heard someone say that, and I think it was Kate Jameson that said that, it really shifted my thinking. It's like we're not fighting this sort of nebulous battle on stigma. We're really pushing back against discrimination. And so how do we get there? I'm on the board, I was on the board, I just finished my tour of duty with Bring Change to Mind, which is Glenn Close's organization with her sister Jessie Close. And the campaign is to eliminate stigma around mental illness. And so we've been doing a lot of reading and research and looking at what's out there. So here's what helps eliminate stigma. Guess what number one is? Anybody want to call out an answer?
Education.
Education, exactly. But more so than that, if you know someone with a mental illness. As soon as you really know someone with a mental illness, that changes your perception. It changes your perception about the scary thing, or, you know, even for me, I had to really look at, I worked with people who had schizophrenia, but now I'm friends with people who have schizophrenia, and it has erased every bit of stigma that I have about the illness of schizophrenia, because these are friends that I can talk to. So that's the first one, but not everybody can do that. The second is to hear stories. To hear someone's stories, to read a story, to get into someone's life, to see that you've got a connection. And the third one is to, and this is all under, I guess, education, but the third one is to normalize this, is to make this more normal so that you don't necessarily have to go to the back door somewhere to get help. We were doing some work with some tribes. So it was a really awesome conference with 5 tribes in Montana. And the mental health facility was in a place where everyone felt really embarrassed to go there, that were on the reservation. And they didn't go because of the stigma of that door that said, you have a mental health problem. So that normalization, I think, is a huge one. The other thing is thinking about how to tell employers. And Linea has taught me everything I know about this, even though I'm intellectually knew some stuff. Nice introduction, made me sound really smart, but once you're a mom, you just you're not so smart anymore. But how do you talk about a mental illness to an employer? And when Linea was having med changes, when she first got this job at Harborview, and she was ill in the morning, and trying to get to work, and there's this little note in my head saying, yikes, what's going to happen if they find out that, of course she's got a book out there, so they're going to find out. But how do you talk about the fact that you're sick in the morning because you've had a med change and you can't get in? She says to me, we can't worry about that because it would be discrimination if I needed accommodations and could still do my job. So she went to HR, talked to them, and was able to come in a little bit later until the meds settled down. So that, again, that voice and that discrimination, how do you do that? How do you ask for accommodations? The other thing I've learned is to take that behavior out. We consider mental illness a problem of the behavior. And so if the behavior is somebody's fault, it's, mom's fault, she did too much, mom's fault, she did too little, your fault because you didn't try hard enough, you didn't do this, you didn't pull yourself up by the bootstraps. The behaviors are symptoms. Those are symptoms of a mental illness. And yes, we all have our weird, quirky behaviors. And I said this today. I have 2 daughters, totally different temperaments, and the way that they would present with the symptoms of bipolar disorder would probably be pretty different. I'm sure that my older daughter would be way more on the manic side. And she would be one of those that would probably be
I was dealing with, and eventually, though I of course I have an amazing family, and eventually got amazing doctors to support me. Journaling was really my first self-discovery of what it was really like to live with bipolar, to live with a mental illness. And that was the first time that I really, through that process, I began to realize the importance of self-care, and began to work on myself. I also, as I went through the process of, getting a diagnosis, and was first hospitalized because I was suicidal. And then I began, after the first time, I started researching organizations like NAMI or like Bring Change to Mind, different organizations online, that I began to see that there was a community out there. And I began to see that it's 1 in 4 families, it's 1 in 5 people, that there's young adult organizations online as well. There's an organization called Half of Us that that let me know that 1 in 2 college students deal with some sort of mental health condition to the point where they need to step out of a class or change their schedule or somehow change their life because of anxiety, depression, eating disorders, that it's 1 in 2 college students. So it was really wonderful getting to know that there were other people out there like me going through the same things I was going through. And I began to see other people sharing their stories, and that other young people were starting to talk about it on these sites. Like there's the site Strength of Us, it's a social networking site where young people are actually talking about their illness and talking about what they're dealing with. So it wasn't as much me alone with this big word hanging over my head of bipolar and no one else to talk to, no one else that I knew about. But I started to see that there was a community by finding that online. Through that, I realized the importance of advocacy and realized the importance of sharing your story. The first time I shared my story was in my mom's special education class for graduate students on emotional behavior disorders. And it was amazing because as I shared my story, I was really nervous and I kind of rambled, and then I had people come up to me afterwards, young people, and say, "I've never told anyone but." And I started to realize how common it was. So from there I branched out, I shared more, and every time we present now, I always hear, "I've never told anyone but," or "I have a cousin, my son, my neighbor, my sister." It's everywhere. So through all this, I moved up to the point where we started sharing our story on the biggest level that we could, which was our book that just came out May of 2012, Perfect Chaos. And now we get emails every day that it's everywhere, that everyone is sharing our story, that everyone in the audience is touched by this and is here for a purpose. And it's interesting, it was exactly 6 years from the day I was first hospitalized to the day that the book came out. It was 6 years in 1 day. So it was really amazing that I was able to find support and get to the point where I felt comfortable enough sharing my story. I think it's almost funny in a way. We always talk about humor as an important aspect of this, because if you don't have humor, then everything can be so devastating. It can be so harsh and so painful. And in seeing the small, weird little things in life, like the fact that the book came out 6 years almost to the day, are those little things in life that keep me going, that they're signs that this is the right way, this is the right thing. That, life has its ups and downs, and I've been able to do things like work at the WHO in Geneva, Switzerland, looking at mental health policy. Life has had its funny ways of showing me that though I live with this illness, I'm able to take it and make it into something greater. I'm able to do amazing things in my life. And I just actually wrote a piece for the NAMI National website that talks about how you don't have to be confined by your illness. You don't have to be constrained by your illness. You can really accomplish what you want in your life. And though you have to accomplish achievable goals, I could never be an NFL player, but I might be able to do amazing things like work at the WHO on mental health policy. So it's really important to know that those things are possible, that I was able to actually, when I was in Boston, sit at an event where the Vice President of the United States of America is talking about mental health and talking about how we need to change the system. It was really amazing. So it was just your turn, but
My turn. Yeah. So I thought of something interesting I was going to tell you that was a good story, but I forgot what it was while I was standing there. It'll come back to me, but yeah. So I really want to talk about my entry into this world of mental illness, having taught about it and had lots of experiences out there, and having worked with young adults and youth with mental illness. I thought I was pretty well prepared, but I was not. I was not prepared as a family member, and I just did remember the funny thing I wanted to tell you, which ties right into what I have prepared. When she came to my class the first time, this was a class, I'm actually teaching it right now. My students are online tomorrow night because I won't be back in Seattle in time, but most of the time I'm there. And the class is on emotional and behavior disorder, which I'm on a quest to take the word out of behavior, like behavior health. I'm sorry, but it's not just behavior, it's a symptom. So anyway, that's one thing. But I told my students that we were going to have a guest speaker the next week. And my students are studying to be school psychologists, school counselors, and getting master's degrees and doctoral degrees in disability. So some of them are young, and there's a wide range. I mean, not young by 24, 25, and some of them are very experienced. And two students right at the front of the classroom said to each other within earshot, they said, oh my gosh, I wonder if she has bipolar. I wonder if the guest speaker has bipolar. She said, because bipolar is like nutso. She said, I had a roommate with bipolar, and the other woman goes, oh, I know. She says, how did you manage that? And the two of them are talking to each other about this, and about what somebody having a roommate with bipolar. I'm just like, oh my gosh, just wait until next week, until your guest speaker shows up. So I didn't say a word, and class ended, and they all left and went away. And the next week they came back, and they took their seats up front. And I introduced Linea, whose last name is Johnson, and they pretty soon figured out that it was my daughter. And she started speaking about living with bipolar disorder. And these two women could not even look at me. I mean, they guys have people come up to you all the time and ask you where to go. Where do I go? What do I do? Who do I talk to? And you have a list of resources. I wish everyone in the community had those lists of resources. Stop by the NAMI table and pick them up, so that when somebody says to you after you might share, I just heard this young woman talk last night about bipolar disorder, and somebody all of a sudden says, my sister is in the initial stages of bipolar disorder, and we don't know who to talk to. We haven't told anyone. NAMI people, do you hear that every day when they come to you and tell you these things? So knowing those resources, that's my big ahas, the things that I've learned from this piece.
And I'm going to actually go back to her point on honesty. And a lot of you here bought our book ahead of time. A lot of you here may have already read our book. And, you know, I went through a really tough time, 19 to 22. I was hospitalized twice. I was going through a lot of self-mutilation, drug and alcohol use. I was having a really difficult time, but then, you know, I decided to start to try to get healthy, and I started to take care of myself and listen to my doctors, even though it was hard to trust them when they would give me medication that would make me sick, when I thought that I could just use drugs instead and that would make it better. But I started to get stable, I started to figure things out, and I started to become an advocate and talk about my story. And I still had these pretty deep depressions, but I was functioning. So when it came to honesty, at first, when I spoke, I thought that it was being honest, sharing my story in the past, my story from 19 to 23. I thought that was being honest, but I didn't want to tell them that I was still struggling, because I wanted people to have hope. I wanted people to know that, you know, look at me, I'm doing so much better, and this is what it looks like, you can live well with it. But when I did the NAMI convention, this actually ended up hanging in my shower for a few months afterwards, because after I did the NAMI speech in front of 7,000 people where I was supposed to talk about hope, I was so depressed, and I was to the point where I was almost suicidal again. I had started cutting again, I had started throwing up again, and I was up there talking about hope and how you're supposed to have hope, and I didn't know how. And so, in full disclosure, a week later I was hospitalized for the third time. And it had been, I was 26, the last time I was hospitalized I was 21, and to be honest, I was ashamed. I really thought that I was not strong enough, that I, you know, wasn't working hard enough, that I wasn't, somehow I thought that good things happen to good people, that if you do good things, then things will work out for you. And one of the things that happened when I went into the hospital, they made me watch this Faces of Recovery video, and you know, to give you hope. And I watched this video, the first part of the video, and it was all of these Washington State advocates that I had worked with. And just a week earlier, I was this face of recovery, and it just, I broke down. I had to go to my room. I started having a panic attack. I felt like I was letting everyone down, like I could never go out there and be an advocate again, because I was back in the hospital, I had failed, and I thought that, you know, I hadn't worked hard enough. And I thought about this friend of mine who, she was 18 at the time, and she has bipolar. She's been living with bipolar since she was 14, and she had just started college, and I had kind of been trying to mentor her and talk to her about how to be, like, work with your friends, talk to your friends about your illness, and how to work with getting disability student services. And all I could think about in my mind was not letting Sarah know. I did not want Sarah to know I was in the hospital, because she saw me as this role model, as this woman who was doing well and who had what she had, that had gotten through it. And I just thought that I had let her down. But what I didn't realize is that that was the depression speaking. That I didn't even realize that when I first went to the hospital, it was so different from the last time I went to the hospital. The first time I was scared, I was suicidal, I had no idea what was going on. I didn't know what kind of resources I needed, what kind of treatment I needed. When I went to the hospital a year and a half ago, I was brave, I was determined, I was strong. I went in knowing exactly what I wanted. I knew I wanted electroconvulsive therapy, which I know is very controversial, but for me, I know it works now. I went in knowing what I wanted, how to get the treatment that I needed, how to advocate for myself. I was an educated advocate for what I wanted in my treatment, so I could work with my doctors better. It ended up working out much better, and in the end, I realized that I was a good role model. I was getting help when I needed it. I was stepping up to the plate and searching for help and getting help when I realized that I just couldn't be safe anymore. And I was telling Sarah that, you know, having a mental illness, though some people can have a life free of symptoms maybe at some point, it is a lifelong illness. It's something that we're going to deal with, having ups and downs. We may have cycles for the rest of our lives. And so I was proving to Sarah that, you know, this is something that we're going to have to deal with, but it gets easier, and it gets to the point where you can manage it. And I was showing her that it's okay to get help, that every time you ask for help, it gets easier. And every time that something goes wrong, you learn from that. You learn from the experience. You learn what kind of doctors you like. You learn what kind of medications you don't like. You learn, you know, what works for you. And I thought that it was really amazing when I kind of came out of my depression and realized that I was a good role model for taking care of myself. I was working hard enough, and it's something, you know, when people ask me if I had this magic pill, would I get rid of my bipolar? And I wouldn't. I think it makes me a stronger, smarter, braver individual. I think it makes me more compassionate. I think it makes me more driven in a lot of ways. It makes me care about people in a way that I didn't before. I wouldn't get rid of it, even though it's very difficult sometimes. And even though I go through processes of grief, like I did when I was hospitalized this last time, of why is this happening to me again? Why do I have to deal with this? But every time I get stronger and I get smarter about it. And it can really bring families closer, like it has with ours, with the honesty. It's brought our family closer. And it can bring communities so much closer, with more compassion and care for one another.
See why she teaches me all the time, so. And don't forget to write questions down. So if you have questions, write the little index cards you have are for questions, and then we're gonna pick them up and take questions and answer and have a conversation with you all. So we were empty nesters. Anybody in here a new empty nester? Pretty awesome, huh? Yeah. First you're like, oh, my last left home, and then you look around and it's like, yeah, this is cool. So you're there, and you know, my husband Kurt and I we were sad to see our last daughter leave home because we had a wonderful time with them, but we also were really excited about a different life, and we were close to adult children, and we were having a great time. And she went off to college with a scholarship, and we couldn't believe how well everything was going. And then it all crashed. It all crashed in a really big way when she became ill, and things went sideways. And we went from thinking that this was the start of a different life to all of a sudden going, we have a daughter who is critically ill and may die. And we're not really sure how to deal with this. And it was all really very, very frightening. And I know this is not a unique story. And the more that we travel around the country, and the more that we get emails, and the more that we get messages and Facebook friends, and it's everywhere. And no one is really prepared for it. So it was huge. But it also did make us a lot closer to each other. And one of the things that was said to me when I was in the midst of all of this, and you know, I work with PhD counselors and mental health counselors, and so I was seeing them in the hall, and it's a great place to work if you've got a crisis in your family. And one of them said to me, have you considered family counseling? And I said, you know, I'm in crisis mode, I can just barely keep it together to teach and do everything I'm doing. And he said, it's an opportunity for you to be closer than ever. And so family counseling, individual counseling, all of that, I can't say enough about it. This whole piece was tough. But as I thought about what do I want to really share and end with, and then we're going to have questions, but I am going to end with my epilogue. Now you get to end, but this is mine. So I'm going to write what I wrote here, because I actually read this a couple days ago. I thought, you know, this really says it. I did a pretty good job on this. I wrote this in the fall of 2011. The book came out in 2012, and we were finishing up the epilogues in that fall, so I'm going to read this to you. I didn't know how this story would end, and it seemed that there were times we both thought, good, it's now finished, stability at last. And yet that was not the case. As I read through this book for the 100th time, I realized that we are all richer for our experiences. I still feel an overwhelming sense of fear and sadness when I reread portions of this memoir. I have realized that we all will have some post-traumatic stress hovering around us from almost losing our daughter. Most of the time, I can let loose the anxiety that accompanies worrying about the future, but sometimes I cannot. I do know that I could never have predicted where the telling of our story would take us. When we first spoke with our wonderful agent Stacy Glick at Distal and Goodrich Literary Management, she asked us why we wanted to share this intimate journey with the public. During those years, as we struggled to find the right treatment, care, understanding, and support, we became very aware of the stigma attached to mental illness and the fear people have of the mentally ill. In conversations with patients, family, and friends, the outpouring of cries for assistance and for understanding and support compelled us to step out and to share our own experience. Stacy told us to do whatever we wanted to accomplish, whether this book was ever published. What wise advice! As we spoke at more and more conferences and to larger and larger audiences, the response was the same. There were so many people and families who struggled with the challenges of mental illness, but were afraid or unable to seek help or find their own voice. Linea found her own voice, and I was privileged to watch it happen. She found power in her voice, and she wanted to share that power. I'm still learning every single day how to live with an illness that causes a person's mind to unravel and sometimes make it impossible for that person to care for herself. My heart aches as mothers from across the country reach out to me with their own stories full of pain and worry about their children struggling with a severe mental illness, and from fathers as well. I hear from people who have been wounded by the pain of growing up with a parent with a mental illness, feeling alone and not having anyone to talk to about what was going on in their home when they were a child. I teach my classes differently now than I did when I was an experienced child and young adult professional, working with those with mental health conditions only during the school hours. I know what it feels like to be unable to let go of the worry throughout long weeks and months and sleepless nights when your child or heart is sick. Linea once told an audience, I can't believe this, here you are again. Linea just told. Linea once told an audience that she wouldn't change anything that she had been through. I didn't agree at the time, and I'm not sure I agree completely now. I never want my daughter or my grandchildren to go through this amount of pain. I will always remember those terrible days, but I also know that I'm a stronger and braver and perhaps a better person for having experienced them. And I know so much more about depression and bipolar disorder. These lifelong illnesses go into remissions and have flare-ups, just as do physical illnesses. It can be overwhelming to think about that prognosis in the same sentence as my daughter. But like chronic illnesses and diseases, Linea's partnering with her doctors to treat her bipolar disorder through management of medications, counseling, and therapy will lessen the likelihood of flare-ups. And if any do occur, they will be less often and less severe. She is learning how to manage this, and I am learning how to support her. In this journey, I am reminded to relish each minute of peace and joy, and believe that In this journey, I am reminded to relish each moment of peace and joy, and believe that more such moments are coming. Life goes on with all its unpredictable pain and also with its joyous surprises. My work is to let go of the fear and agony of the past few years and to trust in the future. I don't know what is next, but I do know that Linea is living her own life, slowly, one step at a time, sometimes taking a step backwards, but always steadily moving forward. She has proved how much she wants to be well, how much she wants to live. Her comments to others in her articulate and brilliant voice have opened the door for people to understand and embrace an illness that is common to so many families, and not one to be hidden away in fear and embarrassment. Although our story is now public, and there are a few nights when I lie awake wondering if it was the right thing to do, I'm ready to take the next step. This was before the book went out. I had a panic attack before the book came out. It's like, what are we doing? Ultimately, my family is okay, more than okay. We have not turned away from one hard conversation, from one honest yet painful discussion, from one heartbreaking episode of an illness called bipolar disorder. Yet it doesn't define us. It has challenged us and in so many ways enriched our lives. We have not turned away from loving each other. Now you know the ending.
And that's not even the ending. It just keeps going, but it keeps getting better. And so you probably wonder, what do you tell thousands of people in an audience that you're supposed to talk about hope when you're suicidally depressed? So what I told them was the truth. That in my darkest days, the things that still give me hope, no matter what, no matter how I'm feeling, is science, the science of the research that's going on, the fact that there are organizations like the International Mental Health Research Organization, who is raising billions of dollars for brain research, that are trying to stop the silos of this brain research versus this brain research so we can just find what is going on in the brain. That gives me hope every day, knowing that there are new treatments coming out, knowing that when I had ECT the first time, they used sine waves, and when I had it done the second time, years later, they used rectangle waves, and just in the small change in that science, I have not had a depression in a year and a half, which is the longest I have not had a depression since I was 14. So knowing that science like that is happening, that things are changing, that we're finding better treatments all the time, that gives me hope no matter where I am. Another thing that I didn't mention at the NAMI conference, because it happened this week, is the hope that it's getting talked about at a national level as a national concern. Suicide is being talked about as a national concern. I was at this amazing conference and forum and gala called the Kennedy Forum, where it's the 50th anniversary of JFK's Community Mental Health Act, where he tried to deinstitutionalize America and make community mental health centers. And though it didn't end the way that we all wanted it to, we now have wonderful community centers in a lot of communities, but there are a lot of people that are homeless on the streets that are not in institutions anymore. So this conference came together to see, how can we change this? What's happening in the system that's broken? Why are there not enough beds? Why are there not enough people getting treatment? What's happening with insurance that needs to be changed? How can we support everyone? So it was amazing to be at this conference where the vice president was there talking about how this is an important thing for America that he believes in. The Secretary Sebelius of Health and Human Resources was there talking about it. Chelsea Clinton was there talking about it. And it wasn't just a Democratic thing, it was bipartisan. This affects everyone. This is Republicans, Democrats, it doesn't matter who you are. Mental illness affects everyone. And we were all here coming together to talk about it and to make a change in how America is going to start helping more and more people if we can. So that really gave me hope that every organization was there, all the advocates were there, NAMI was there, Depression Bipolar Support Alliance was there, Active Minds was there, any organization you can think of was there, on top of politicians and athletes and celebrities. Everyone was coming together to talk about that this is a national concern. We need to get support for people because the discrepancies in treatment are astounding, and it's really breaks my heart to see. The other thing that gives me hope is having an audience like you, where I know that each one of you, just one person in this audience, if one person takes this story and tells one other person, we're spreading a spark. we're letting people know that they're not alone, that it is 20% of the population, that people can live well with it, that though there are people that struggle, though there are people that are violent, there are also so many people that are able to live well with it and work well with it and learn how to work with their symptoms. That each of you has the ability to spread this message and start to make people feel like they're a little less alone and fight the stigma so people can start actually trying to get services. Because not only are there not enough services, but stigma keeps people from even accessing services. It keeps people from wanting to get services in the first place. So if we start to break the stigma, we can start to get people to try to get services. So that gives me hope too. So just to end, before we do questions, I just want to remind everyone that stigma is discrimination, that this is a civil rights issue, that this is actually a human rights issue, and that we can all make a difference every day just by talking about it through small things. What I did most recently that I think is a small thing that everyone can do, when we went to rent a car at Enterprise at the airport, they had a sign, they had all their Halloween decorations up, and they had a sign that said, insane asylum this way. And, you know, it really kind of, it made me angry immediately. And I was like, you wouldn't have colors this way. I mean, it's a sign, it's the same kind of thing. So the small thing I did, I knew that the person that was helping us find our car, that she wasn't, you know, in charge of the sign, that there was nothing maybe she could do about it. So I just asked her politely for her manager's card. I sent him an email, and just through small things like that, we can make it so that the next person that comes up to Enterprise doesn't feel the stigma that comes in small things like Halloween that causes a lot of stigma. So I just want to spread that message that we all have the power to make change, and thank you all for having us. We are really open to any questions, harder the better. So if you have cards, we're passing them.
We're going to also show you, Michelle's going to pick up some cards, so if you've got them, and maybe somebody else could help. Would you help, sir? Yeah, so if you've got any questions on a card, hand it out. And I don't know what happened to our, well, we're going to have to, we're not even seeing what just So we wanted to show you our website, but it went away. It's probably on some of the handouts or something, but it's lineacinda.com, and it's got resources, tons and tons of resources. Oh, sorry. lineacinda.com, and there's a resource page. So it's got resources for young adults, for advocacy, for all kinds of stuff. So check that out, and you can come up here and look at this computer screen if you want to see it. Yeah, I will. Yeah. Let me find one. Why did you have electric shock or ECT, electric convulsive therapy? Why did you do that?
I chose to have ECT because I was in a really big suicidal loop, and I would find everything I could see in a room to hurt myself with, and had to have a one-on-one for weeks. And it wasn't safe for the hospital anymore to have a patient as suicidal as I was. It wasn't safe for me, obviously. And so the options were either go to the state institution for 3 months or longer and try to find medication, or do what is actually very common in America, which is to get ECT. It's just not talked about. And so I decided I wanted to do that. At the time, I actually thought, well, it'd either kill me or fix me, so I was willing to do it. My parents were not as excited about it. So that's kind of why I did it in the first place. But ECT is not the miracle worker for everyone. In my life, it works amazing. It really works well for me. And I now know that when my medications aren't working, my next thing that I want to try is ECT. There are memory loss problems with it that for me went away. I still have a little bit of memory loss, but I would rather have that than have almost lost my life in several times. So I feel like it's worth it. But
And there's all, ACT happens in your own community, and it works really well for a lot of people. You'll be surprised that people do management and maintenance and are in and out, so it's out there. So here's a really good question. College. So how did you manage, or do you have some ideas and strategies of your schedule for college, how to get accommodations, what to do if you're going to college with a mental illness? And on top of it, I would say while your peers are, starting to explore and party, and how did you manage college?
So college for me, the biggest thing for me is to slow down, and that's not to do with college, that's to do with everything. I move really fast, I do a lot of things, and in college I wanted to take full loads, take as many credits as I could, get done as fast as I could, or even just stay in school and take as many credits as I could. So the biggest thing I learned was to take smaller course loads. And my counselor, my therapist, every time she would just see it coming. Every time a quarter would start, she'd be like, so did you sign up for classes? Yeah, I'm taking 18 credits, I'm taking 20 credits. And she's like, okay. And then the next week she's like expecting it, and she's like, okay, what are we cutting back on? And what classes? So let's talk about it, because you need to cut back. I know that you feel like a failure if you're not taking a full load. You feel like, you can take 10 credits, it's okay. And so that was one of the things that I had to come to terms with and realize that sometimes I could take full loads, but a lot of times I couldn't. So it was knowing kind of my limits and knowing that. The other thing about friends and, when everyone's going to parties and all of that, that was something that I had to kind of mature into as I began to accept my illness more. Because when I first was diagnosed, I was trying to fight against it, and I was trying to do everything I could to just not feel it anymore. So I drank a lot, I did drugs, I did anything I could to just not feel it. And so in college, the important thing for me was finding a support network that wanted me to be healthy, that wasn't supporting my unhealthy behaviors. So I found friends that would be like, well, you know what, let's just go to a movie instead of going to this party. I think it would actually be just as much fun and would be much healthier for both of us. So it was finding that support network of friends that wanted to help me make healthy choices, that were there to support me when I turned 21 and stopped drinking, which was a huge deal for everyone. So that was finding a good support network.
And a little bit about the college thing is the accommodations. She would always do this thing where she would take all these courses or sign up for all these courses, and I actually advise some of my students now that struggle with some of this to do the same. Sign up, go to the first class, look at the syllabus, figure out what you want to do, and then drop some. Because you can drop classes, and that way you can really look at the load and kind of figure it out. And then with mood disorders in particular, oftentimes students won't have an accommodation plan until they need it. And instead of having it in place, and maybe if you never use it, you don't need to, but go to the Disability Student Services office and get a plan in place so that when you do become ill or unstable or need support, it's there instead of having to wait for that. So I'm going to take the next question and then give it to you. So yes, I've seen Bill Gates. I've seen him in an elevator at a movie. I've seen him in a furniture store with his wife Melinda buying furniture. And one time when we were driving to my daughter, my older daughter is an artist, and she was doing artwork in an elementary school in his neighborhood. And he and Melinda were walking. I mean, they live pretty normal lives, actually. There's security around them all over the place, but they do live pretty normal lives. Now their children
We're both 19, and Jean didn't know what to do. She was terrified. She disappeared. She abandoned me in my mind, and she just moved in with her boyfriend, basically. She didn't even tell me where she was. When I was hospitalized, even though we were roommates, she didn't know for 3 days that I was even gone. So it was very painful for a long time, and it hurt our friendship for a long time that I thought I moved in with her so she could support me when she just didn't know what to do. Again, if you read the book, in the end, it talks about kind of our coming back together, because when I moved back to Seattle, we still kept in touch, but every time I talked to her, I had a pain in my chest. I just felt like I just didn't know if I wanted to have her in my life anymore, even though she's basically a sister. And so we had a really good heart-to-heart. I told her how she hurt me and why she hurt me. She told me she was scared. She didn't know what it was. She's never dealt with depression before. She was 19. We were so young. We had no clue what was happening. And we really opened up about it. And ever since then, she's become my biggest advocate. When I was hospitalized this last time, she came almost every day. She brought food, she wrote me stories, she just was always there. So I think that also changed as we matured, as we learned more. She got more open with her own emotions and her own feelings around feelings. She doesn't like feelings very much, so she started to open up about that, and then she became able to talk to me about my feelings. So our friendship got much better and is much stronger for it.
And we had a lot of her friends were wonderful, and a lot of them disappeared. And the ones that were the best were the ones that, like Charlie. There's 2 Charlies in the book, Charlie 1 and Charlie 2, and
Both ex-boyfriends.
Both ex-boyfriends, both still in the picture, both still in the book. But Charlie showed up at the hospital and, came in and played games with the other inmates, and one of them actually told Linea, "I'm going to marry Charlie." "You are not. I'm marrying him." But they were wonderful. But there were people who were very uncomfortable about it. Mostly, I think, because again, when you are in a certain world of people that know about mental illness, you have more support than if you're not. But some people in my own family were not really comfortable, and I don't know that we were shunned necessarily, but it certainly was something we didn't really talk about. So.
And actually, the friends that I did lose completely were the ones that I specifically chose because I knew that they were going to be unhealthy with me. They were the friends I chose because I knew they would do drugs with me. The friends I chose because I knew that they didn't care what path I went down. And so when I stopped doing drugs with them, when I stopped partying hard, then they just didn't care. When I went into the hospital, they weren't there for me. So those are the friends that I'm glad are out of my life.
So you mentioned cycles or episodes. Are there certain times of the year that are problematic for you?
It used to be weird. It was kind of the opposite. Let's see. I'm trying to think of what it is for normal people. So in October, normal people with bipolar, normal bipolar people. So in October, I would tend to have manias, and in spring, I would tend to have depressions. Where a lot of people, it switched. In the fall, they would have depressions, and in the spring, they might have manias. But for me, it was kind of switched. That hasn't been happening as much lately, but for a while, that was kind of how my cycles went. It was kind of in the fall, I would kind of get more activated. In the spring, I would get more depressed. And living in Seattle actually hasn't, the darkness doesn't affect me as much as it did in Chicago, because I feel like in Seattle, at least, there's some kind of light that comes in every day, where in Chicago, in winter, it's just gray and dark, and that really affected me a lot. So that was the difference.
And I think what I saw was also around semester finals, like it might have been the anxieties in the fall and the depression in the spring, but when the quarterly tests started, she would always have trouble trying to keep it all together, and then at the end of the semester. But my other daughter would always get sick at the end of the semester as well, only with her it would be a really bad cold or pneumonia. With her, it would be the bipolar symptoms.
Also, anniversaries are really hard for me, like anniversaries of hospitalizations or anniversary of the time that I almost killed myself, the time that I overdosed. For some reason, I have this feeling every year of like, oh God, something is happening, something bad is going to happen, and then I realize, oh, it's almost Halloween, and then I feel better because I realize it's just an anniversary that I'm kind of feeling again.
How old were you when you knew you were bipolar?
Someone told me that I was bipolar when I was 18. I didn't believe anyone until about a year later. when I was 19 and hospitalized. And then it was bipolar 2 and I wasn't even sure about that. So it wasn't until I really had a big mania when I was about 20 that I really thought I was bipolar.
And I always get the question, if you look back, did you see symptoms when she was a child, when she was in grade school? Were there symptoms? And maybe, and I told the provider group this morning, my editor had it the best. She said, if you're watching a horror movie and you're in the audience, you see it coming, right? You see the guy with the big knife coming. But if you're in the kitchen in the movie, you don't know that it's in the hallway. It's only when you go back and watch the movie, you're like, well, of course, I should have heard that music going, dun, 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 dun. But I didn't, necessarily see it. But it's easy to look back and go, yeah, probably so. So, how much, here's a good one. I want to hear your answer for this one. How much do you encourage someone to move forward with their education and their employment, or do you just wait for them to do it on their own or ask for help?
I think, well, that's a hard one. I think it's individual. So I think that it's important to have goals. And I think everyone's goals are different. So whether it's education or employment or just getting out of bed in the morning, I think it's important to always have a goal. For some people, it's important to try to set your goal a little bit higher than make you work a little bit harder. And so that kind of kept me going, having a goal that I had to put a little extra effort into to work at. That kind of kept me going and was good for me. It made me stronger to push myself a little harder. But again, it's really particular to who it is. For some people, just having the goal of putting jeans on instead of pajamas every day, that's a big step when you're feeling really horribly depressed. But for other people, for me, it's the goal of pushing myself to apply to grad schools when I'm really afraid to do so.
So I'm going to reach out to the audience. Michelle, or anyone in here. Is there anyone that can speak briefly about if someone is suicidal or you think someone is suicidal, how to recognize those symptoms and where to go in this community? Would you be willing to just put a little plug in, Michelle, and join us? She's like, oh, thanks, you called me. Let's give Michelle a hand.
I guess if you're looking at dealing with somebody who is suicidal, there's different symptoms or different signs in which you can look for, it's different with individual people. You can see different things as far as, somebody making actual statements that they want to harm themselves, they're tired of living, they've actually said that they are going to kill themselves. You see people that are starting to pull away, they're more depressed, they're isolating, they're starting to give away prized possessions. You may have people that are more angry, more irritable. I do suicide prevention in the community, and one of the big things that we talk about with it is to really ask the person if they're suicidal. There used to always be this big mystery in which you didn't want to openly ask somebody if they were suicidal because you didn't want to put that idea into their head. When that myth is really gone, and it's really about now being able to open up and ask the person, are you suicidal? Are you thinking about killing yourself? And as far as here in Portage County, we have a lot of really good resources and avenues in which to help a person who is suicidal. There's a crisis line which you can call 24/7. We do have cards that are available out in the lobby area by the Healthy People Portage County booth that is out there. We do have the mental health unit that is available here at St. Michael's Hospital. You can bring somebody to the emergency room. A lot of times when dealing with somebody who is suicidal, I think for many people it's dealing with their own anxiety about it. And I think we a lot of times get too caught up in the actual suicide itself as being the problem. And I think when we talk about, or I do like the QPR presentations, we talk about how suicide itself is not the problem. It's just the person's solution to whatever the problem that they're having is. And so really trying to talk to the person, kind of see where they're at, trying to give them, you know, your time, your patience, really, like I said, kind of talking to them, seeing where they're at. Like I said, if it comes to a point in which they're so much a danger to themselves or others, you can involve law enforcement. But a lot of times you don't want to necessarily go to that extreme. The best thing is to look at trying to talk to them yourselves, trying to figure out what risk level and different things they're at. Sometimes you can just get them in to see a counselor or a therapist. But if you really truly believe they are at significant risk in which they actually have a plan in place, you know, they have the means in which they're going to do it, you know, definitely take them over to the hospital. You want to make sure that they are safe. But like I said, that we do have various crisis lines and different things in the community that you can access as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
There's always lots of services. Are there other questions out there that you have? Anybody got any more? Yes.
I'm just curious, it seems like more and more people are being diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and why is that? And then I have another question too. Can this illness be controlled without meds?
Well, I'll give it a shot. I think it's sort of like, you know, the whole autism thing. The more you know, the more that there are people diagnosed, because we're more discreet in understanding symptoms. And with autism, there's now autism spectrum disorder. And a lot of parents are very upset about that because they like the term Asperger's way better than autism. And so, yes, there's more people diagnosed, but they were probably misdiagnosed in the first place. The other thing that comes up all the time is early onset bipolar. Is it possible for a 9-year-old to have bipolar disorder? And we have a friend who's is a social worker, and she has 3 daughters, and 2 of them have bipolar disorder. One is now 14 and one is 21. And yeah, that's what they have, and they were treated for ADHD, and that wasn't what it was. So, you know, I think that the diagnosis is really tricky. It's the wait and see, but I have my students write this paper on the diagnostic label. Is it good or bad? Should we not have these labels? If it ties to research and good medications and good treatment, then we need really good diagnoses. So that's my piece on that one. And then the one thing I heard the doctor say once was, if you're doing really well on your medications and you think you should go off, it's probably because you're doing really well on your medications.
Although there are organizations such as the Icarus Project that really help individuals try to work on a life without medications, if that is their right to choose if they don't want to be on medications. It's very difficult, and it doesn't work well for everyone. It doesn't work well for, I think, most people, but there are some people that it works well if they work really hard and do exercise and meditation and, you know, eat a certain way and sleep and no drugs, no alcohol, you know, are very diligent and work very, very hard. But that's, I think, few and far between the people that actually can work out for. So for me, I know that medication allows me to get to the point where I can use all the other therapies that I use. That medication gets me stable enough where I can actually talk to my counselor, that I can actually go running, that I can actually, you know, be healthy in that way.
So we are like at the end, unless anyone has one more pressing question. One more pressing question. It better be a really good one.
I was wondering, my sister is dealing with mental illness, and our family has convinced her to move from one state to another to be with my mom and my other sister. And she has a really difficult time with that. She feels like she's been forced into moving and doing things she doesn't want to do. Did your parents, like, convince you to do things you didn't want to do, and how did you deal with that they felt was in your best interest?
They did when I was 19 and when I was really feeling suicidal when I was in college. I feel like they say that it was a choice. I feel like they forced me home.
Well, we brought her home.
They
brought her home. She was so ill.
They brought me home, and that was very difficult for me. And it was really hard because I had just got this new independent freedom as a new college student, and finally away from home, and so coming back home was very difficult. But I was able to, living with them, start to learn how to get independent again, starting to get healthier, and living with them gave me the support that I needed to find ways to be healthy myself and get independent. And then also living with them allowed me to work with my doctors on a plan for how to move into independence again.
And that was what I was going to add was, I think we've always looked ahead with a plan. So when things were as bad as they could get, it was like, okay, where can we all be 6 months from now or 3 months from now or a year from now? Because the goal for me is that if I get hit by a truck out here and die tonight, that she's okay. And I think we're there. I think we're there. Of course, she would miss me desperately because she borrows my clothes. But that is the goal. But even the times when she really has to rely on us, it was always, that's the goal. So I think that helps. But you guys have been an amazing, wonderful audience, and we are so excited to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. If anyone has books that they want signed that weren't signed before, we can sign them outside at the table we were sitting at before it started.